So we're back, part two with Nirmalya, and we're going to talk about corporate governance. We're going to talk about how you steer big companies. And you've also a very good insight into Norwegian companies. But what would you say about business acumen and culture in companies?
Now, Norwegian companies, are for somebody coming from India. When I first encountered the Norwegian companies, and the way I encountered Norwegian companies was because my boss used to be Norwegian at IMD, Peter Laurent. For me, it was quite a dramatic difference between what I was used to in India and even to a large extent what I was used to in the USA. And the big difference was Norwegian companies have uniquely a culture which is very open, very transparent, relatively non-hierarchical at some level. Even in terms of salary structures and all, they are much closer than would we, let's say, in India or in America. And everybody who works in a Norwegian company, even if it's the person at Telenor who's making the coffee downstairs, when you go to the coffee shop, has a level of education which is quite high, has a level of professionalism which is exceedingly, impressive, and you can talk to them as a peer. I had never encountered that in my life before, So it was for me a unique culture which I saw, and I never really understood what it meant to be Scandinavian until I made these trips to Norway. Because of course you read a lot, but reading is not the same thing as getting the experience of being in Scandinavia. And I saw the other thing that is of course very impressive about Norway is that everything works and people have such a humane attitude, which I not encountered, that people could be that humane. And so I was very impressed by Norway. And also I have to say, your neighbor Sweden and Denmark to a lesser extent because it's much smaller, but still, so these three countries impressed me a lot, and I made many trips to these countries for that reason. And this culture seeps in very, obvious ways to somebody who's an outsider. So when you're having a discussion in a Norwegian company, the CEO is sitting there, the CFO is sitting there, everybody's sitting there. People exchange ideas quite openly. Now, it is true that in the end, the CEO will make the decision, and when I'm at Elcom, I have no doubt who's going to make the decision, or at Telenor, I have no doubt who's going to make the decision at the end. But you got everybody to have the opportunity to give their opinion. And at the end of that opinion, even if they were diverse, then the CEO would make the decision and he would go ahead. Whereas in these hierarchical cultures like India, most of the time, what you will find in India is subordinates don't dare to speak up in a meeting which has the bosses there.
Yeah.
So if you have the top people there, the younger people will not speak up. A. Secondly, you find in India, in these meetings, a lot of guessing going on. What people are trying to do is show how smart they are. And one way to show how smart they are is if you can guess what the boss is thinking and say it before the boss.
Oh, really?
You see, I used to always tell Cyrus Mistry, Cyrus, can you not ask any questions and make any comments till the end of the meeting? And he would say, why do you say that, Nirmalya? I said, because once you say something, we might as well close the meeting and go home. Because there's nobody's ever going to contradict you after that. I said, so please stay and give your contribution at the end. And Cyrus was excellent at that. And once in a while, when he would intervene in the middle, he would say, even though Nirmalya tells me not to say anything in the middle, I have to say something now. Because so the entire and that's because the power distance in India and the USA is very large, whereas the power distance in Norway is very small. And I remember being with a bunch of Telenor colleagues once, in a program that I was running with them, and we had people from all over the world because Telenor at that time was in about 16 countries. So we had people from Pakistan, Bangladesh, India, we had them all there on the room, Thailand, so we are all sitting together, right? And this wonderful lady sitting next to me, who's the head of marketing, okay? And she tells the story, and I tell her, listen, how did you become head of marketing? She said, I used to work as a cleaning lady. And, when I was working as the cleaning lady in the company, this is how I met my husband, that basically he was working as a manager there. And when I would clean, he would be working late, and I would come to clean, and he would start removing the chairs and all, so that would be easier for me to clean, right? And the Pakistani guys who were sitting with me couldn't believe that, that the manager would get up and remove the chairs for the cleaning lady to clean, and that this lady who started off cleaning the offices was now the global marketing head.
Yeah, yeah.
You see, because we don't have that kind of, mobility in these very hierarchical cultures. And so what impressed me a lot about Norway was the incredible basic level of education and professionalism that everybody has. And secondly was the mobility. Because for me, these were unknown things coming from India. And even though I spent 12 years in America, it's a lot less in America. Okay, America is in between, let's say, Norway and India, but still, it's a lot less. So that was what was very fascinating. And these open offices I'd never seen before. So this was all part of this open culture. So for me, going into Norway was a very important lesson. I remember once running a Salesforce session, and I was talking about incentive plans, of how we would give more commission and change the incentive plan to give a commission to salespeople who sold more. And one kid picks up the hand at the back and says, "Professor, I don't understand the incentive plan." I said, "What don't you understand about an incentive plan, man?" He says, "Are you telling me that if you didn't give me an incentive, I wouldn't work as hard?" And I looked at the guy and I thought to me, clearly we come from different planets, because in America, without an incentive plan, no person is going to get up and do anything. First thing they're going to ask is, what's the incentive plan? And here this kid is telling me he doesn't need an incentive plan because he's going to just work just as hard, whether he gets an incentive or he doesn't get an incentive.
It is a difference. And I was visiting a client from of my former job. This is a very small company on the west side of Norway. And they were having 90% of their clients from outside of Norway. They were building ships. And they are situated in a place that's, it's between the mountains. It's really picturesque. It's beautiful. It's not easy to get there. But the ones who want to come there will come there. So with the Arabs, right? So they would come to this little place and buy ships. And in this meeting, this was the CEO who told me, in the middle of the meeting, the CFO says that he has to go. So he interrupted the meeting because he had to go and pick up children from kindergarten, the CFO. And the Arabs were like, "Don't you have a wife?" And he said, "Yes, but she's working too." So that was also very a story where they were surprised that the male CFOs, CEOs, they will have to go away from a meeting to pick up their children in the kindergarten, because if you don't do it at the right time, you're gonna get trouble. It's not an option not to pick up your children.
The gender equality is, of course, another thing that's very dramatic about Scandinavia and how people behave over there, But I tell you, the most striking thing to me was I get down at the airport at Oslo, and, it's a 1 hour to the downtown from Oslo. So I take a taxi. I have this Pakistani guy, who's the taxi driver, since in Oslo, half of the taxi drivers seem to be from Pakistan. So I start talking to him, because he thinks, "Where are you from?" I say, "I'm from India." So we start having a chat. And then I tell him, so he tells me, "I have a son." I said, "What does your son do?" He said, "My son is an engineer." I said, "Excellent. He must be making a lot of money." He looks at me and he says, "Sir, in this country, everybody makes the same. He makes more or less the same money as I do, but he does meet a better class of people."
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, that's a beautiful Norwegian story. It's unimaginable in any other country.
Yeah, yeah. So what can Norwegian companies learn from Indian companies?
Okay, so that's a more interesting question. Okay, now let me put it this way. In our strengths lie our weaknesses. Okay, so because we have this egalitarian culture, because everybody is educated to a high level, because the social net is so strong, because people have reached a level of affluence where they feel almost self-actualized, and they want to, think about things beyond money and think about what's the quality of life and what am I achieving with my life and how am I behaving. Because of that, there's a certain naivety in Norwegians when they deal with the rest of the world. A. B, there is, for the rest of the world, when they look at Norwegians, they feel these people are not, shall we say, ambitious. They are not go-getters. They're too laid back. Indian companies tend to be much more aggressive than Norwegian companies are in terms of business practices and businesses, in terms of leverage, in terms of debt, in terms of how they are, interested in growth. You see, whereas, Norwegian companies are less so. So that's a very big difference between the emerging markets in general and the Western developed world, especially Western continental Europe, I would say. When you get to the UK, it's less so. When you get to the US, it's even less so. But especially continental Europe, there's a degree of satiation which we in the emerging markets are not used to because we were born hungry. Right? So I would say that's interesting. And the other thing is, because in Norway, you cannot imagine a person doing something wrong.
Oh, yes,
the assumptions that they make when they deal with people from other markets leads them sometimes into situations where they get taken advantage of.
Yes.
And that same thing you have to remember, you can't behave like a Norwegian in India and succeed.
No.
Just like you can't behave like an Indian in Norway and succeed. Because the fundamental assumptions of how society works are different.
Absolutely. That we're really innovative. We can make a product from 0 to 1, but to scale it from 1 to 1,000,000 is really hard for us.
And that's a thing that all the Scandinavian countries suffer from, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. And that's why these countries, with Switzerland, were some of other countries where they have many global companies, because they realize very quickly that either you're going to be subscale.
Yeah.
Because, scale has become much more important once markets have opened. Once markets have opened, you're competing with global companies across the world. Even if you don't want to be global, you have to be globally competitive to serve your home market.
Yeah, absolutely.
And because of that, there is a scale issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a perfect ending of this session. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it very much.
Yeah.